Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Preservation School class, The Restoration of the 75th Police Precinct Station House. Our upcoming programming includes our annual conference on March 29th. We will have information about our upcoming Preservation School classes on our website, hdc.org soon. If you have any questions about programming, you can contact me at marbulu@hdc.org. Tonight's class will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for free viewing. You may also watch all of our previous Preservation School classes, virtual tours, and conference panels on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts for supporting Preservation School. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat and Gregory will address them at the end. Now I will hand it over to Gregory Dietrich to lead tonight's class. Thank you.
So thank you for joining me tonight. I'm pleased to be talking about the rebirth and revitalization of the former 75th Police Precinct Station in Brooklyn. I also just wanted to give a special shout out to Olivia Brazzi, who was served as the reviewer on the New York State Historic Preservation Office side of this application. So I've been working in the field of historic preservation for over 25 years and as an independent consultant for the last 15. When people ask me what I do as a preservation consultant, I typically respond, ideal and significance. And that is, my work is typically informed by three main tasks: research, survey, and analysis. I think research is pretty straightforward, especially if you're making the case for significance. You want to know everything about the building, including individuals, designers, any events associated with it. And then survey, well, in my experience, you can have crackerjack research on a property only to find out when you visit the property it's no longer there, it's been replaced with a building, or it's been irrevocably altered and a shell of its former self. So survey is so important as part of the process. And then lastly, analysis, because analysis deals with the nitty-gritty of applying the applicable evaluative criteria in order to make evaluations about significance. So this methodology can play out in a variety of ways, whether it entails grant applications, National Register nominations, independent studies of historic buildings or historic landscapes, community-driven requests for landmark or district consideration to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, or even assisting in the process of presenting to the Landmarks Commission for approvals. But for our purposes tonight, it is about the historic tax credit application, formerly known as the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit. So this is a three-part application entailing a part one to affirm the historic property's significance, a part two to detail the proposed rehabilitation and how it will conform to the federal guidelines, and a part three to offer documentation at the conclusion of the project showing the work was completed in accordance with what was proposed in the part two. I should also note that properties that are listed as individual buildings on the National Register of Historic Places, such as the one I am going to be talking about tonight, do not require completion of a part one. And I'm not going to go through these other project samples, but just to say that these upper two in the center here were tax credit projects that I worked on. The one on the left is the Brooklyn Fire Headquarters building that is located on J Street in downtown Brooklyn. And the one to the right is a loft building that's located in the Garment Center of Manhattan. So the subject of my talk tonight involves the former 75th Police Precinct Station located in the East New York section of Brooklyn. The property is relatively close to the Sea Line, which has a station stop to the west at Pennsylvania and Liberty Avenues, which unfortunately is off the map here. It's right over here. This particular section of East New York is a hardscrabble neighborhood populated with mom and pop stores, car repair shops, houses, and a really angry Doberman guarding a junkyard directly across the street. In proposing my scope of work for the project, I included the completion of the historic tax credit application, preceded by a feasibility study, in order to ensure that what was being proposed was going to meet approval with the New York State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service, the two agencies tasked with the review of these applications. Historical information on the former 75th Police Precinct Station was gleaned from the National Register nomination, which listed the property in 2003. And according to the nomination, it was designed and constructed in 1888 as a station house with a stable. And over here, you can see the stable, by the architect Emile M. Gruet. It was originally known as the 17th Police Precinct Station, later the 153rd, and then finally the 75th. In 1926, a garage, as you can see down here, replaced the stable. In 1973, it was decommissioned as a police station, and in 1975, it was acquired by the People's First Baptist Church and renovated the following year for church use. Between 2010 2012, it suffered really its first phase of devastating destruction, wrought by a combination of a lack of maintenance, seasonal elements, and then culminating in Hurricane Sandy. And then 4 years later, it was sold to the client for the project, 555 Holdings. So my research indicated that contrary to the information contained in the nomination, the police station was designed and constructed in 1892 by George Ingram. And I think the reason may have been the fact that when the nomination was drafted, there was an earlier article from the 1980s by New York Times architectural critic Christopher Gray, in which he attributed it to Gruet and to this year. That was followed up by another article years after the nomination, in which he corrected the record as a design by George Ingram in 1892. So who is George Ingram? He was born in New York and attended Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. In 1876, he began work as a city surveyor, and by the early 1880s was working as a draftsman and assistant engineer for the Brooklyn Department of City Works. During the late 1880s, he worked as a civil engineer on numerous civic projects, which also included bridges, by the way, but was most notable for his distinctive station house designs, which standardized a plan that could then be adapted to meet individual precinct needs. Among his other stations for the city of Brooklyn was the 18th Precinct Station in Sunset Park, a mirror design that was contemporaneous with this station house, along with other designs that included the 4th, 13th, 15th, 19th, and 22nd precinct stations, which were all different from this. George Ingram retired in 1905. So like his other designs for the city, Ingram's 75th Police Precinct Station House and stable were designed in the Romanesque Revival style, which was initially popularized by Henry Hobson Richardson in his design of the Allegheny Courthouse and Jail in Pittsburgh. And as it turns out, I went to Pittsburgh last year, so I was very familiar with this particular property. The style, which rose to popularity during the late 19th century, was based on 11th and 12th century European forms. Ingram's station incorporated a variety of masonry materials, such as polychromatic brick, red sandstone, terracotta, limestone, bluestone, marble, later some of the materials were replaced with cast stone. But these core masonry materials were widely accessible at the time via rail transport, which made their incorporation a lot easier for builders throughout the country. The style also incorporated fanciful carvings, stained glass windows, ornamental ironwork. And in addition to their fortress-like designs, which were enhanced by castellated turrets or centrally located towers, Ingram's Brooklyn stations were often situated on corner lots that further emphasize their commanding presence within the community. And I can only imagine when one of these stations would go up, I mean, how a neighborhood could be transformed, honestly. In describing this particular property, which, we're looking at the mirror image here with the 18th, I described it as a medieval fortress crossed with a Grimm's fairy tale castle. Another thing that I discovered was through consultation with the New York State Historic Preservation Office. Although the agency had initially considered the 1926 connector and garage as a non-contributing addition to the historic property, it reevaluated it and changed its determination, thereby making it a subject of scrutiny for this project. So there was a little bit of a redirect after we learned that this was now considered a contributing addition. My initial survey of the station indicated a host of issues on the exterior, including deteriorated and or missing brick, sandstone, and terracotta elements, deteriorated mortar joints, graffiti covered and or stucco parged exterior brick and sandstone, spalling and efflorescence, also known as calcium deposits, compromising its ornamental sandstone trim and ornamentation, deteriorated and or missing wood sash windows and enframements, broken window panes, wood, brick, and concrete masonry unit infill of those window openings, and or inappropriate window replacement units and rusted and or missing cast iron fencing. I also want to point out that these were photos from my first survey. Also, I should note just generally throughout the presentation, if you don't see an attribution, those are my own photos. But just to say that when I surveyed this building, you can see this wraparound sidewalk shed that actually ended up obscuring a lot of elements that came to light later on once they could take that away and begin the work. So that was a revelation for me as the consultant working on this application. Other issues exacerbated by unsympathetic alterations and deferred maintenance pertaining to church ownership included the walling off of the original station house entrance in order to adapt it to church needs. Also, the patching of distressed piers and ornamentation with non-compatible materials, as I mentioned previously with this stucco parging, substantial damage from water infiltration due to the deferred maintenance, sheet metal panels covering missing spikes in the cast iron fence, and the aforementioned stopgap measures to prevent further water infiltration through masonry infill of the window openings. So just speaking to the point I was making about the sidewalk shed, this was compounded by, as you can see, this former entrance located where the porch was supposed to be, and that had also been further walled, of course, to prevent any sort of break-ins and vandalism. So I had not really gotten to see what the entrance looked like until this was all removed and I could get into the building. Although the exterior showed the ravages of weathering and unsympathetic repairs, nothing could compare to the ruin that existed within. Most notably exhibited by the collapse of the 3 station house floors and its roof. Infrastructure, cosmetic, and safety issues abounded, including piles of attached and detached building debris, as you can see here, along with television sets and furnishings, Peeling plaster perimeter walls, wood rot affecting extant window surrounds and decorative trim, and rusted triple height cast iron posts. In fact, inspections by multiple engineers indicated that the station house was in imminent danger of collapse, making the case that the building needed to be demolished and replaced. However, never underestimate the analysis and vision of a seasoned veteran structural engineer. Unfortunately, the ravages wrought by the seasonal elements and compounded by Hurricane Sandy made the survey of the station house interior nearly impossible, relegating views of the surviving architectural elements from the roof and a single doorway of the connector. However, this was remedied later on through the use of a cherry picker, which you can see in the upper left there, which enabled me to inspect the building's interiors via the opening in the roof. I have very little experience writing these things because I'm not an architectural conservator by trade. So I have to say it was pretty thrilling. But the one thing that I hadn't appreciated in the past about these mechanics is that it not only takes you over, but it takes you down, which is pretty remarkable that you can have this arm that goes up, across, and then down. So getting down into the center of this particular interior and being able to get some really good shots of the window, chair railings, all these surviving details along the perimeter wall was invaluable. Although the connector and garage were accessible on foot, the damage was also extensive, as you can see. And certainly you can see the peeling plaster, damage from water infiltration. You'll probably notice the treads here are missing. These are actually wood planks. Then you've also got the compromised concrete floor. And this, by the way, was the one doorway that I could look into on that initial survey into the station house, but could not go any further. There was no floor, just a lot of debris. And then in terms of the garage, what we're looking at here is the ground floor looking toward the entrance on Liberty Avenue. And then basically the upper floors in which you see similar damage to the connector in terms of peeling paint, peeling plaster, water infiltration, and then just sort of a hint of one of these sort of inappropriate window replacements that were done. So that brings us to the proposal. The proposal for this property was to rehabilitate the former 75th Police Precinct Station into a dormitory and health center for the city of New York to serve as a lessee and with a sublessee operating the building primarily as a men's homeless shelter. So in other words, the city of New York would be a landlord that would then contract this out to a social services organization overseeing the shelter component. And naturally, this would also entail the need for administrative offices for that organization, in addition to this health center that was planned. The team consisted of 555 Holdings, which is a local Brooklyn developer. The architect was Ziskovich Architect, which is based in Florida with offices in New York and Boston. They've been around for, I guess, 44 years and do a lot of sizable new construction projects, such as transit hubs and airport buildings, school buildings ranging from kindergarten to university level, as well as high-rise residential. For all of our New Yorkers, you may recognize Old Structures Engineering. They have also been around for decades and are certainly what I would regard as one of the preeminent structural engineering firms in the country, doing specifically this type of work, working with historic buildings and shoring and revitalizing them. Architectural Conservator was Mary Kay Judy, Architectural and Cultural Heritage Conservation. Her work spans the globe. And then, as I said, I served as the tax credit consultant with Reliant Builders as the GC. And Reliant had a prior relationship with 555, so naturally they were brought in on this project as well. So how did the architect deal with the building layout in order to satisfy the dual programs of shelter and health center? So we're looking at the proposal for the first floor of all three sections. And I added these labels just to help orient you. So Liberty Avenue runs here. This is the primary facade. And then this is Miller Street, which is the secondary facade. And then what is considered the rear elevation of the building. So in devising the layout for the first floor, Ziskovich placed the health center in the front half, primarily of the station house. So what we have here is the porch reintroduced, leading into this reception area with the reception desk here, and then the door into the examination rooms. And then following this corridor down here into the various doctor's offices. Behind the health center, you have a cafeteria / multi-purpose room. And then we've also got what I have called the breakout space, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But needless to say, of course, with any cafeteria, you're going to want a kitchen. And so there was an industrial kitchen planned for this area of the connector, along with a sizable pantry. And then we also have these front areas, a portion of the station house, as well as the connector, that looks like it is planned for conference space, but to the contrary, it actually fills a lot of office needs for the administration of the health center. And then moving along to the garage, the first floor contained the entry to the homeless shelter units on the upper floors. So we have this security desk here with the metal detector. We've got a series of intake offices here, along with a restroom. And then we've also got an ADA ramp that then connects to the connector through the building to the station house. And I should note that at the outset of the project, well, of course, with no floors, that it was very important that we get a complete alignment of this flooring. So this was a very important corridor of circulation for the building. And then in addition, since ADA accessibility is a requirement, we have the introduction of an elevator where the former stairway was, along with multiple means of egress. This one that exits outside of the building, along with this one that also goes into the basement, as well as to the upper floors. This other one that also connects to the basement as well. So I didn't need to show you both the second and the third floors because they're largely the same just in terms of their layouts. But just to say that anytime you see a rectangle like this, that's a bed. And we were able to achieve, or I should say Ziskovich was able to achieve, getting 157 beds into this homeless shelter. So these are dorm rooms that are often large rooms that have been then sub-partitioned along with lockers. And I'm going to show you some photos so you see how that plays out. And then you've got the bathrooms here with the showers at the end. You've got laundry facilities, and then, of course, connections to the stairways on all these dorm room areas. And then in the upper right, that is the front of the station house. This was planned and configured for the staff personnel of this social services organization overseeing the homeless shelter. So you've got this great sort of conference space. Turns out, a turret of this size makes for a really wonderful and distinctive meeting space. In addition, you've got smaller meeting rooms or offices as well in this section. And then you've got a kitchen lounge for the staff here as well. And then that brings us up to the fourth level. And I wanted to show this as opposed to the ultimate roof covering the building, because of the fact that there were several additions that were proposed and ultimately approved by the agencies. The first one included a two-story rear addition to the station house and the connector. And this is what was realized in the breakout space that we saw earlier, that I called the breakout space for the cafeteria. You can also notice, so these are, of course, the roofs of both the station house and the rear addition. And you can see multiple skylights to facilitate natural light into the dorm rooms. Then moving into the connector, we did have an existing bulkhead here that was then supplemented by a one-story penthouse along with another bulkhead for the stairway, which was a bit taller. But this whole penthouse is basically the configuration of an L, as you can see. So, ultimately, the more beds, the better for the city with respect to them trying to solve their problems of the unhoused. And ultimately, we were able to accomplish it with this particular layout. So I thought we would look at three challenges that were essential to the agency approvals for the historic tax credit. And the first challenge, which was also integral to its proposed use, was the reintroduction of the floors and a roof in the station house. So this was accomplished through a multi-phase approach devised by Old Structures, consisting of the removal of existing floor remnants, the introduction of staging platforms, and the construction of new floors, also known as working platforms. And essentially, this culminated in an enormous steel and joist system that would tie into the existing load-bearing masonry walls forming the building envelope. So it probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Even with the benefit of having a completely open to the sky roof on the station house, it was not conceivable that you could actually lift up, a three-story cage and plop it into this interior. All of this had to really be built from the ground up. And as I said, tie into the existing masonry for structural support. So the four illustrations that we see here are essentially a snapshot of a larger drawing that featured multiple phases. And hats off to Old Structures because they are doing this in sequence. So you really get a sense of how this played out in terms of building these floors and roof. So here's the first example, which is this idea of removing the wooden debris that you saw, that those were the surviving wooden floorings, and then creating this staging platform here so that you could then tie into the masonry load-bearing wall with the new floor. And I should note that this was essentially a steel structure that was covered with plywood as a substrate. And then you can see how now you've got this part of the floor that you can now work on yet another part of the missing wood flooring remnant for removal, and then replace that one with the new flooring, and so on, and go to the opposite and do the same. So you can see how this was really sort of a systematic process where you really had to start in one specific location and work from there. And so here are some photos of the work in progress. And you can see how the cast iron columns are now reincorporated into the new floors and ceiling. And then, of course, all the reddish colored posts and beams are all new construction to shore up those areas where there were no cast iron or it was just completely compromised. And these are a couple of photos of the finished product. You may have some questions about, well, why this particular, ceiling treatment, why this particular flooring treatment, why this particular lighting. And I would speak to that in so much as we were going to be using this for institutional use, where maintenance is a very big deal. And then the fact also, coupled with the fact that because these floors and ceilings did not exist at the outset of the project, that there would have been a little bit more flexibility with respect to the agencies and the review of these particular items. So this really did sort of maximize the maintenance and the reuse of the spaces. And I just did want to highlight this. This is the cafeteria, and this is the rear of the building, the former rear wall, with the former windows now opened up and serving as doorways to what I call that breakout space in the rear, the smaller kind of conference area. Over here, we can also see the counter for the kitchen that's on the other side of that wall, and then the entrance to the kitchen, and then a couple of the cast iron columns that were able to be reincorporated into the space. So since the historic tax credit program prioritizes the retention and restoration of architectural elements, the applicant was required to salvage and reuse the existing features and trim to the greatest extent possible. This precipitated a salvage plan that was drafted by Mary Kay Judy, along with specifications for restorative treatments for exterior elements. So following the reintroduction of the floors and roof, the applicant's general contractor was tasked with inventorying each element and its location before removing it, storing it off-site, restoring it to the greatest extent possible, and reincorporating it into the building. Any elements that were missing or damaged beyond repair were replicated to match the existing design. In addition, one of a pair of distressed garage doors, which you can see in the center here, was restored while the missing door was replicated to complete the pair. And I have to say that this really was a study in windows. I was asked to do a survey of all of the windows so that the agencies did have a sense of what exactly existed within these perimeter walls, and there was much. So here you can see the finished product of these restored and or replicated window surrounds and wainscoting, chair rail molding, baseboards. And then in the lower right, you can see these garage doors that were restored / replicated and reintroduced into the first floor entry of the space on Liberty Avenue. And also just a note, I spoke to this earlier about the need for ADA compliance because these historic garage doors were not ADA compliant with respect to easy ingress and egress. They were instead basically resituated in their former locations and pinned open permanently, which actually I think makes for a really nice feature that does reference the history of the use of this building. So the third challenge that I wanted to talk about was the placement and scale of rooftop additions and mechanicals. Certainly the prospect of proposing rooftop additions, a larger bulkhead, and rooftop mechanicals made for a rather complicated approvals process that was eventually accepted by the National Park Service after consultation and revisions. These photos were taken as part of the viewshed analysis, showing the initial physical mock-up of the proposed penthouse addition and railing, and a subsequent virtual reality image of the penthouse and railing. So for those of you who are familiar with the Landmarks Preservation Commission and their requirements for rooftop additions and mechanicals, you will recognize these particular aspects showing the proposal. And naturally, this has to be photographed from a host of viewpoints surrounding the building on all four sides. That is several blocks away until it can no longer be seen. So there was a lot of thought that ended up going into this. And then you can see the actual one-story rooftop addition as it was built, along with this railing, which was, of course, according to code. And I just want you to note that when you're standing on this street, which is actually not a very deep street, you cannot see this particular rooftop addition. And then also, if you're standing here on Miller Street, you can't see any of this. However, as you get further away, of course, it is going to come to light. This was the stairway bulkhead. You've got the one-story L. This is over the connector. And then you've also got mechanicals, such as these condenser units that were necessary for the heating and cooling of the building. Also, this gives you a good view of the two-story rear addition that was approved. Important to note that when proposing a new addition to a historic building, that the federal guidelines preference something that looks like it was from its time, as opposed to trying to mimic or replicate what is there now. So there was a very conscious attempt to reference the arches, but not replicate the arch design here or any of the cornice elements. So this is the finished project, and I think you really get a sense of both this fortress-like appeal and also sort of the architectural whimsy throughout. Some things that I just wanted to call out while we're looking at the big picture here, because I don't necessarily have details of everything, but really some wonderful ornamentation going on in this building. Here we've got this limestone frieze, which has this lion in the center that is surrounded by this very swirly jungle motif that also has some images of faces within them. Over here, we've got these wonderful brackets that terminate here. One is of what looks to be a bull or a wolf, and another lion over here. And then we've got this, what I would call meticulation, which is this sort of scallop detail along the cornice of the porch, which features these grotesques as the bosses here, that is the terminations of these points. Just wonderfully imaginative. I also wanted to highlight, though not so well in this scene, particular image, but you'll see it in another one, that there is this sort of zigzag motif that Ingram used in this design that really sort of anticipates Art Deco. And I'll show you a clearer photo of that in the next series of images. But also this wonderful use of ironwork, just as appliques you can see in various parts of the building. Also, this turret, this corbelline detail in the turret, which really feels more abstracted to me than what one might consider, sort of the medieval fortress. So I thought that was rather interesting. And then along with these wonderful mini turrets that you see dotting the roof, which when you're on the roof almost looks like they're standing at attention to the king here. And then lastly, I just wanted to speak to the porch itself, which, as I said, was completely obscured when I saw the building. And it was only when I got inside of the building, when they had the flooring, that I was able to see the doorway, and then also really appreciate this once the church entrance had been removed, along with the wall, the infill that went with it. I think this is highly evocative of the work of Louis Sullivan, and I just think it just further makes this design so fascinating. And then you've got this enclosed shed roof porch-like area with this slate roof over here. So I think the details are really helpful because you get such a great sense of the polychromatic aspect of the building with respect to the use of the variegated brick colors along with the red sandstone. Then you've also got this blue stone and also cast stone as well. But getting back to the porch, this wonderful grill that was original to the porch. You can see these a little bit better. I have one close-up of one of the faces in the final slide. And then you also just see not only the wonderful choice of brick colors, but also the design of the brick. That is the diaper pattern, this sort of sawtooth motif that he's got going on that wraps around these turrets. It's really just such a study in brickwork as well. And then this is the example that I was alluding to earlier, this sort of zigzaggy motif over one of the recessed openings for one of the windows, this sort of faux balconette located on the Miller Street elevation. And so one of my mentors is Andrew Dolkart, who has been such an inspiration. But I do go back to my grad school days because I remember when he took us out on our first survey, and our studio area was Williamsburg in Brooklyn, where he would stop us on the street and say, "Now really look at the building and see what you can find." And truly, to really look at this building is just an incredible exploration. And so taking this just a little bit further, we've got this wonderfully recessed faux balconette with this sort of oversized arch detail. These are actually flowers with stamen. I hesitate to call them rosettes because they're not rosettes in the conventional understanding of that architectural term, as this wonderful sort of frieze here. And then you've got these very squat balusters crafted of the red sandstone, and these wonderful lion's heads serving as the brackets that again have sort of a more abstracted character to them than some of the other carvings like the masks that you see along the porch here. And then this is just a rooftop view, so you get a sense of the one-story penthouse that wrapped around this existing bulkhead, and then one of the sentries I call it a sentry, one of the turrets from the roof view. So this is looking at the connector with the garage here in the background. And then, of course, this is looking back at the connector and the garage from the Liberty Avenue view. So moving inside, we're looking at the reception area to the health center. So here's the reception desk. As you enter this door, you are led down a corridor with the series of examination rooms that I called out earlier, or you can take this hallway, which leads to a series of doctors' offices. And then moving toward the west of the building through the connector, this is that floor through corridor that I talked about that connects all three sections of the building with the ADA access ramp here in the garage that then leads to the aligned flooring connecting to the station house. So this is the connector that we're in, and here's just sort of an example of the cubicles that are forming the workspaces for this particular area. One thing that I have to say about cubicles is they're reversible. So there's no harm done to this building in introducing these for work purposes. And then finally, I want to just show this view of the lobby of the garage, which serves as the entrance to the homeless shelter, which has the series of intake offices lining this corridor that also features this ADA ramp. And one thing that I was pleased to see was that we were able to reincorporate the newel posts from the stairway that we had replaced with the elevator into this particular access ramp. Now, just looking at the dorm rooms, just some representative views. When you see the flat arch windows, you know you're either in the connector or the garage. And if you see the arched, you are in the station house. In this particular photo, we know we're in the top story of the station house, the third floor, because we've got those skylights that I pointed out earlier. So generally speaking, you can see these low partitions. Again, another reversible feature, these lockers for each resident. And then also just sort of these open light-filled rooms, which was pretty fantastic. Lower left, example of one of the bathrooms with the showers at the end. Here, one of the laundry facilities, and then here, one of the multiple means of egress that were introduced as part of the ADA compliance. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you'd like, you can also unmute yourself. What was your particular favorite part of this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Michelle?
What was your favorite part?
Well, I would say going up in the cherry picker was rather thrilling. So that actually it was like entering another world. I have to say, to see the building from that vantage point and to get a fuller understanding of what was there. In terms of architectural elements, I think I've sort of waxed on about pretty much everything that I found completely extraordinary about this building.
That would be a lot of fun. That does sound cool. How long did construction take, and when did the building open?
Well, okay. So this project, well, certainly I started my preliminary with respect to submitting the first application about what we were proposing. And suffice to say that we first had to present the idea for the stabilization and the reconstruction or reintroduction of floors and roof to the station house. So that was sort of the first part. And then ultimately construction began after that approval. We could begin that work, which I want to say was around 2017. And then the building finally opened after 7 years in February of last year.
How often were you actually on site?
Well, so what was interesting about this particular project, because, typically I like to plan for 1 or 2 site visits, but with this particular project, because things were being revealed through the systematic elimination of debris, then augmented by the aspect of being able to see each level up close once the floors were in, precipitated multiple site visits. So I would say I was probably there about 5 times during construction and then 2 times after construction. And the reason being after was that in addition to surveying the building, I needed to also replicate the views from the viewshed analysis that we had submitted as the proposal for the rooftop additions to show that the actual views aligned with what we said they would be.
Did you get approval from LPC for the whole thing at once, or did you have to go back through for like phases?
So this building is not designated, so LPC was not involved in this process. But I do want to note actually that because it is within a US distressed census tract, it did qualify and was able to capture the New York State commercial credit as well as the federal credit. So both of these are 20% in a reduction of federal tax liability and 20% reduction in state tax liability, or through a refund captured over, I believe it is 5 years. So this project, I mean, while we're on the subject, was essentially $15.7 million in terms of the budget, and resulting in 3.1 million apiece with respect to tax credits.
So that may answer the next question. Given the
Okay.
condition of the building, what was the main motivation for restoration rather than demolition and new construction?
I believe that the main motivation was the use of the tax credit. Now, my understanding from speaking with the client was that they had, several engineers come out and look at this building, look at the walls, and basically recommend, as I said, replacement and new construction. Then it's quite possible that the developer's ears were gotten by somebody who basically advised them that, well, one, that they should definitely meet with an engineer with preservation experience, and two, that if in fact they went down that road, that they would be able to qualify for the tax credits. So that really was the motivation here. And my further understanding from the engineer was that these walls were built to last. So in contrast to everything I showed you about the interior of this building, the walls held up pretty well, enabling this reconstruction of flooring and roof.
Does anyone have any other questions? Well, not seeing any. I think that is it then. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you very much, Gregory. This was fantastic.
Thank
Uh,
you.
as I said, um, this will be up on our YouTube channel. You can watch our other classes and many other panels and tours as well. Please do check that out. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you all for coming or seeing, watching.
It counts.
Thank you, Michelle.